Today on Empowering Workplaces, we are talking to Ed O'Boyle, Global Practice Leader at Gallup, on the linkages between culture and recognition. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for everyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We are your hosts, culture designer Maddie Grant and organizational psychologist Sonia Lucina. Join us in today's awesome conversation. Hey, Ed, it is so nice to see you again. Thank you for coming on the Empowering Workplaces podcast. For our listeners, we actually met a few months ago at the Work Human conference, and Work Human is an organization that is really based all about recognition and how important that is for employee engagement. So we had the opportunity to talk a little bit about that, back in, was it April? We had a great conversation then. So I'm very excited to be able to dig into the topic a little bit more with Ed today. So Ed, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and who you are before we get started?
I'd love to, and it's great to see you again, Maddie. So I've been here at Gallup for 18 years, and as described, part of my responsibilities at Gallup is to lead our research practice and also our consulting practices. And I came to Gallup prior to being at Gallup. I spent a lot of my career in consumer packaged goods marketing and doing innovation and other product development, which of course required the kind of teaming and engagement from each other where people are coming from disparate roles and really trying to put things together. And so during my career at Gallup, I do some of that and also have a chance to work with some excellent clients. And a couple of years ago, WorkHuman and Gallup started a conversation about recognition. And obviously, WorkHuman is passionate about enabling productivity through a recognition platform that you could build inside of your organization. And at Gallup, we have this thing called the Q12, where we measure these 12 elements of engagement. One of them is recognition and praise for doing good work. And so it was great to come together as two organizations to really study, okay, what is the employee viewpoint on recognition, what's happening about recognition, and most importantly, what's working in organizations that are successfully navigating these recognition platforms and activities versus organizations that may be struggling in order to make that happen. And so I've been working with them and with other clients throughout the world and talking about how do you connect your culture, your values, and your recognition program together. Because Maddie, it might not surprise you, but a lot of organizations are doing all those things, but very few of them are seeing the obvious overt connections between them and driving the outcomes that they're trying to get after. So
yes, so I'm vigorously nodding because that's exactly the piece of the survey that I was really, the research report that I was really interested in digging more into, is that true connection between, the data and the culture piece, which of course, as a culture consultant is kind of my bailiwick also. Before we dig into some of the numbers, I was actually wondering if you would define recognition for our listeners. I wonder if everybody actually is thinking the same thing when you use that word.
Probably not. And a funny thing that you mentioned that, because when we started working together with WorkHuman, we actually expanded our thinking around the concept of recognition. So at Gallup, in our Q12, we talk about recognition as being a recognition or praise in the last 7 days for doing good work. So there's a work dimension of that. At WorkHuman, they describe recognition through 3 dimensions. One is a work component, like doing good work, praising each other for the productivity of the team. But there's also life events that happen that we want to celebrate and recognize each other for. And then lastly, we also want to make sure that we're recognizing our each other for anniversaries or other work-related events, promotions, and things like that. And so what is recognition? Recognition is delivered to a person either a peer or from a manager or others, in a way of celebrating or acknowledging your personal performance or activity within something that's going on. It's not walking by a whole group of people and going, hey, thanks, really good job, and being very generic or lacking authenticity. And it does mean that you're giving it, with some specificity around why you're giving that praise or that celebration to those individuals.
And is it top down or is it peer to peer or both?
Yes, it is both, and it has to be both, because we as human beings really love the ability to celebrate and recognize each other. And it is almost impossible for us to be able to give the kind of recognition that we need to give towards each other in the kind of frequency if we're not doing it peer to peer. And also having leaders and managers and other folks that you work across collaboratively, also giving you recognition.
Do you think it matters if certain people or personalities think they are good at it versus not good at it? You know what I mean? Maybe that's where something like Work Humans platform really helps, right? It allows anybody, because some people are not good at giving compliments in general, right? For example, they
Yes.
just, if it makes them feel uncomfortable, it doesn't come naturally to them.
So, Maddie, it reminds me of the movie Ratatouille when
I
the
love that
chef
movie.
says, anyone can cook. Well, I think anyone can give recognition. And by the way, I think one of the reasons that people don't give more is because they feel awkward or obligated to give it in a very certain way. And what we found, both studying with WorkHuman, but also just across, when recognition is authentic, it is time bound around why you're giving it, and it has sort of a moment of heartfelt kind of understanding of what was done. That is the way that you can do it. And so it's a lot easier than I think we believe it needs to be when you're giving out recognition, because saying good job for something that's very specific, I think is part of the way that people like to see them each other give and take recognition. So.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to dig more into that later. But I just spoke to somebody yesterday who described her culture as a place where everyone gets a lot of recognition, and it was complete coincidence. And of course, I told her we were going to be doing this podcast. But it was really interesting to see somebody describe their own really good culture very specifically with that as like the main thing that made it really good. And she actually said at some of their all staff meetings, the recognition stuff goes on quite a while, but she said it's a really important part of what their culture is. So I thought that was great.
It's amazing. And I wish that it was more frequent, because when we measure this both at the workplace level, but then also at the individual level, only 23% of people say that they're getting the type or the frequency of recognition that they're actually looking for. So your friend actually is really lucky to be working in a place where recognition is part of the behaviors of the organization.
Yeah, that's what I told her. Is it's clearly embedded in their processes, which for us culture people, that's what we look for, right?
Yeah, and Maddie, when you do culture work, I'm sure that if you're working with a manufacturer, they have like a safety recognition or a safety program
Yeah.
where they stand up and everything is safety protocols and things like that, and it's done no matter what, no matter where you are in the organization. The mission is to get people talking from a recognition standpoint in the same way that they do some of those other things. It just becomes the natural part of saying hello to each other or opening a meeting or closing a meeting.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that you're ultimately trying to get into your culture. And that's where recognition really starts to flourish.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about the data a little bit. Do you have any specific data points that you want to mention before we talk about the ones that we prepared before?
In the studies, I think the biggest shock that we learned in the work that we've been doing together is that only 1 in 10 people in the world have been asked how they would like to receive recognition were they to get it.
That's interesting.
So,
Tell me more.
there are reports out there that say public recognition is great. Other people say, I only want it in private. I want it from my manager. I want it from this. I want it from that. And all of those are relevant and all of those are probably accurate. But why are we not asking, if you're a manager or a leader, Maddie, if I were to give you recognition sometime in the next few weeks, months, or year, or wherever, what kind of recognition do you like? Do you like it to be public? Do you not like it to be public? Do you want it to be written? Do you want it to be just a verbal celebration at the end of a meeting? How do we want to do that? And I know that managers are really working hard to have better conversations with their employees. This is a really easy one because if you're a manager and your antenna is up, you're looking to give praise on good work or living the values out in the way that you want them to, and doing it in a way that's off-putting to someone will have the opposite effect than what you're looking for, which is to drive celebration and productivity on the team.
So do you think that those different ways that people like to receive recognition, does that or should that feed into the multiple different ways that recognition is given? I mean, in terms of like actual practical, having multiple ways. So it's not just a recognition program that does one thing.
Yes. The best way to do it is to have the right amount of frequency, have the right amount of sort of investment that you're putting towards it, and also the right amount of celebration and getting teams to know that they're really producing in a way that's consistent with who we are and who we aspire to be.
Yeah, so let's talk about the why a little bit. One of the data points I was given was that employees who receive great recognition are 20 times as likely to be engaged as employees who receive poor recognition, which kind of goes in line with what we were just talking about, right? And that instinctively makes sense. But there's a piece of it where you have to wonder about the authenticity part, right? Is it a quantity, like people, X number of people get recognized every week, but is it really real? Or is it just hitting a checkbox? You know what I mean? Like, how did you kind of consider things like that in the study?
We considered the sorting effect of what is great recognition versus not so great recognition. I'll just call it that for the purposes of today's conversation. Were around the frequency, the authenticity, the specificity, and delivered in a way that was compelling to me and fitting with the values of our culture. So when those things were present, that's when you were getting the kind of great recognition that was there. You mentioned so many of things that I wanted to comment on, but one is this tick box kind of thing is Maddie got recognition yesterday, so we're going to not give her recognition, even though she did something awesome today, until next week, because I've got to actually hit the next person on the list. And that comes back to that authenticity, which is recognition needs to be distributed in a way that's saying the things that are working and working well. But it also can't have that favoritism. So there's a line, you have to navigate between those two.
Right. It sounds a little facetious when we're talking about it, but it's true that you can imagine a situation where, Helen always gets recognized,
Yes.
but some of the really quiet people on her team never do.
Right.
What's up with that?
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
And that's where that great comes in is, great managers, which thankfully there are many of them out there, know how to actually manage and navigate these chalk lines and make sure that they're delivering the right frequency and the right kind of recognition so that they've got the team in a place where they're all celebrating. And, by the way, sometimes there's team celebrations, right? So we all did something great, and that way you can recognize the individuals on the team. That way you're increasing the number of touches you get on that. And then plus, we mentioned earlier that peer-to-peer, Maddie, that's why it's so important, is because if I'm co-working with someone and something great happened, why can't I just give spot recognition right there? That's where you get that greatness and sort of embedded into the values of the organization, which is so critical. Because if it feels like something that we do, because of the time of year right now, we're moving into the holidays. We give holiday recognition, those kinds of things, which are great, but that's not really going to drive the values of the organization. It's not going to really drive the performance of the organization. It's sort of perfunctory as opposed to inspirational, if you will.
So, and this idea of employees who get great recognition are really engaged. I'm assuming in terms of the data that is at all levels, right? So whether you're a manager or a senior leader or a, like ground floor worker, it still matters. You still can be much more engaged if you get that recognition, right?
Yes, right. Speaking to the leaders who are listening in on this, one of the things that I have found in talking with many, many leaders is that when they start giving more recognition, they actually feel better about their jobs. So it actually helps to increase their engagement because they're distributing that. But as importantly, what they're looking for is what's working in the organization. So these people are getting work done. These people are, down a little bit in terms of numbers, but they're still delivering the results. And so they tend to lift up their own boat by actually giving and distributing more recognition, which is one of those things that is actually engaging for leaders and for managers. But we also need to get some too, because we have a bucket that we're trying to fill with energy, and you fill energy by other people observing and believing that you're doing quality things that are helping the company or organization move ahead.
And I would think that managers themselves maybe don't get recognized that often other than from their managers, right? They don't necessarily get recognized sort of from the bottom up, but that I would think could be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, there's one of those. The two of us are smiling because there's one of those things that if you're saying great job to your manager, are you really authentically delivering on that, or those kinds of things? So insert your own narrative there. But yeah, managers and supervisors in particular, some of the stuff we're studying right now is they're really getting squeezed. They're getting resource squeezed, and I'm not just talking human resources, but also budget resources, and they're still being asked to deliver on what were the objectives. And so, sometimes taking a pause and having someone recognize them for some of the things that they're actually doing to make the glue of the organization hold together, I think is really super important, that we as leaders and managers start to have our antenna up and be looking in order to deliver against that.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important because it's like managers are humans too, right? Like
last I checked, we have not yet been. A bot has not replaced us.
Not yet, exactly. But I think in terms of our culture work, as we're looking at or working with organizations that are trying to be more authentic and more transparent and even more decentralized, like they're able to have some of those conversations that with emotional intelligence, where you can say to your boss that you appreciate and you can see the work that they're putting in and what they're juggling and their perspectives and stuff like that. And that it seems like a relatively newish way to think about the system from all perspectives, if you really have a good open culture like that can support those conversations.
And oh, by the way, just think about that, taking it one step further, which is if your culture, and you talked about transparency and authenticity as critical pillars of a lot of the value systems that are out there, how do you deliver on that authenticity and transparency in a feedback mechanism if you're not giving positive feedback? And there's lots of studies out there. It ranges anywhere from 3 to 7 to 1 in terms of recognition or positive feedback to coaching or lifting up and change. And so if you're not filling the bucket up enough when you're trying to get more or different things from your team, it's really hard to do that if you haven't built that bank account of by celebrating the things that are actually working on the team. You can then be a bit more critical of some of the things that you also need. And your team, because you've made those deposits, are going to have the energy to want to go take on some of those challenges that are really hard, and
Yeah.
and they know that you've got their back and that you're gonna coach and celebrate to that. That's when you've got that kind of authentic and transparent and future oriented culture that many leaders are just desperate to aspire towards from an organizational design standpoint.
Right, right. So the other data point I have is that among employees who have great recognition experiences, 72% say that performance for little things is commonly recognized at their organization, compared with 16% of employees with poor recognition experiences. So that means not just, hey, good job in general, right? Tell
Yeah.
me more.
So the gap between those is stunning, right? And going back to your earlier example of your friend who said that, in meetings, we just naturally have recognition moments and things that we can celebrate. When your culture is actively looking for things that are working inside of it and talking about them, we'll call that recognition, right? But when those things are present, little things matter. And when organizations see someone going just that extra mile for a customer, or someone making sure that an order that might have been a little bit ordered wrong is changed, again, to benefit someone, or making sure that we're synchronized. If you've got something that's due at the end of the day, and I know I need to get this to you, but it wasn't on my list to get done, and I step in and rejigger my priorities for the day in order to make that happen. When we have a culture that comes back and says, "Thank you for doing that. I know that you did something special or a little bit different every single day." Now all of a sudden we're actively looking for what's working in our company and trying to replicate that as often as possible. The contrast is you'll hear from organizations, and Maddie, if you haven't heard this, I'd be surprised, which is, well, I don't know what you're talking about. We do annual awards and we do all these other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
and they're big, and they're, we take everybody off site and we celebrate. By the way, those are wonderful. Nobody is saying
Yeah.
that that's
Nothing
not
wrong with
great.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Thank you. But it's not embedded into your culture if it's only special event, special occasion, big things. It's little things that matter in our day-to-day interactions with each other that actually really change who we are as an organization, versus just the big things.
So let's talk a little bit more about the culture piece of it, because I think the sort of aha moment for me from the study was that the recognition has to be very tied to the culture that the organization wants or is encouraging, which means that it has to be very specific and known what the culture is that the organization wants, right? And I'm really obsessive about the language of how we describe culture. So we have a culture assessment that's all about measuring culture in a whole bunch of different ways. But the words that when you do the culture assessment, you get your report. That we have a whole bunch of different words to describe the culture, but they're all positive. So this is what your culture is. And it's around things like agility and innovation and inclusion, all the usual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that you need to take those words and decide, is this what you want to be in this moment? Or do you need to shift to be more futurist, more agile, whatever, right? But at the same time, when you decide that's when you decide, are these words still accurate? And if so, can I then start to list out the behaviors that prove that our culture is like this? So, we say we're collaborative and transparent. What does that look like in real life, right? And I'm thinking through, to the recognition stuff. If we know what that looks like in real life, then we can recognize it when we see it literally
Mm-hmm.
in our peers and, people in the workplace, as they're doing things that are aligned with that culture. So is that what I'm describing? Is that sort of how you see this data kind of showcasing also that you need to be able to recognize very specific things that are aligned with specific cultural elements that an organization has?
Yes. So briefly, when we look at culture, we look at defining your culture. What is it? How do you, and you describe that through the language that you use, aligning the organization around that aspirational culture, driving adoption of it, which means that you're now living it out in a day-to-day kind of a fashion. And then lastly, how do you put in sustainment mechanisms in which to make that work? And one of the topics of conversation that I have with leadership teams is, are you using your recognition platform, whatever that may be, in order to drive the changes that you're looking for? And you had one collaboration, and most organizations aspire to be more collaborative. And so when you're thinking about your modeling as a leader, are you actively looking for and celebrating collaboration in a way that you hope everybody in the organization does? And when you do that, you're doing a couple of things. First of all, you're celebrating the success of that particular group for coming together and collaborating the way you want them to. Second of all, because you're using your pulpit in which to recognize people publicly, you're now setting an example of what are the standards that you aspire for us to achieve as often as possible. And then the third thing is you're shaping that behavior because you're disproportionately recognizing the things that are most important to you as a leader or a leadership team around where you want to shore up the organization from an aspirational culture standpoint. That's what this report is uncovering, is the mismatch between, I have these values and I have this recognition stuff. Why are you not connecting those two things together overtly and signaling to everyone in the organization, we want you to be more collaborative. We want you to be more agile. We want you to be more customer oriented. We want you to be whatever those are. And here's how I'm celebrating and defining for you all, meaning the organization as a whole, what it is that we love you to do more and more often. And that little mindset shift is fun to watch when leaders go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm not doing this.
Yeah, it seems so obvious, right?
Exactly. Oh, we need to be more customer oriented. Well, are you disproportionately celebrating people, particularly people who are in secondary, not customer facing roles? Are you celebrating those people when they step up and step in? Well, no. Well, if you do that, they're going to recognize that you know that that's what you want them to do, and then start to lean into that more often. And then you're going to become more customer centric as an organization because of that. Now, it won't happen overnight, everyone. So this is not the elixir that's going to make it all perfect in a 24 hours. But, consistently and persistently staying on these messages and reinforcing them will have a tremendous impact on both your employees' engagement at 20 times and also that connection to the values of the organization, which we know energize people to do more for you as a company. So.
I mean, I feel like the key, or one of the keys to what you just said also, is that secondary level of person, right? Because the customer facing person really probably knows that their goal is to be, responsive and customer facing. But it's everybody else who, if that's a true, very strong cultural element, everybody else should figure out how they can be that way too, even if they don't actually interact with customers at all.
Yep.
But how do you imbue that value into the work that you do, even if you're in accounting or food service or whatever? Like, I don't know.
Well, and a lot of times what we find is the disconnect is you'll have a frontline person who's working with a customer or client and they have a billing issue. And that person needs help from that accounting person, right? And so
exactly.
When that accounting person says, I'll get to you next Tuesday, okay, that's a week from now. That's a long time in customer world, right? And
well, or your processes mean that they have to, go through 6 departments to even get to the billing person.
And that person who breaks those walls down and helps make it easier for that frontline person, not only is that frontline person going to have higher well-being and feel more engaged because they had somebody that was helping them deliver on the promise, but celebrating both of them for the work that they were able to collaborate together is now saying, this is an expectation of our company. This is the way we want to work. So,
yeah, love it. So, of course, we're about to run out of time, as we always do. And I know you shared a lot of really great, practical things already in our conversation. But if you were to leave the audience with, one or several kind of practical tips for how to get how to bring more recognition into their workplace, no matter where they sit. What tips could you give them?
So I probably take it at three levels. From the peer-to-peer or the individual contributor level, is if you want more recognition, you should be giving more recognition. So the more that you recognize, it becomes a contagion, and I mean that in a very positive way, not in a flu way. That when
Not in a
people are
pandemic way.
exactly when people start saying, "Hey, great job. I really appreciated you stepping in and helping here," then all of a sudden they start to pay it forward. And that really creates individual contributors feeling great about the work. That was the peer-to-peer thing we mentioned early on. Managers, I would coach to say, make sure that you're giving a lot of recognition, but also asking and making sure that the people around you know, here's how I'd like to get some recognition. If I'm doing right by you, I'd love to hear about it. And if not, I'd love to hear what I can do to be better about that. And then I'll end with leaders, because I think the modeling that leaders bring to their organization around the importance of this. It seems like one of those things that's a sort of off strategy in some organizations, and
Fluffy to right. To some
and
people, it
and,
might be
ve-
fluffy.
and very fluffy and doesn't pay back. Well, we know that a more engaged employee is far more productive than a not engaged employee and a disengaged employee. We can give you the math on that. No one believes it when we run the numbers, but I'm just going to tell you that there's an ROI to this. But leaders, not just looking for the ROI, but they should be looking for, is this the company that we want to be? Is this the organization we aspire to be? And the more that they're delivering on the celebrations and the feedback around, as a leader, this is what I want us to be, and I'm celebrating the people who are doing that, signals to everyone else in their organization that A, this is important, that B, it's important to our business and to who we are as human beings towards each other, and that C, it helps us achieve our aspirational purpose, which is to be better than we ever were and continue to aspire to be, that company that that on our best days we get to be, but we do that a little bit more often.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This was a really wonderful conversation. And I actually have a million more questions for you, but we'll have to save that for a future podcast. But thanks again for coming on today. This is awesome.
I appreciate the invite, and let's do it again whenever you'd like.
Great.